Hey, how's it going? What's good? My name is Thomas, and welcome to my channel, Are We NPC?
We're coming back on the air after an interruption due to technical problems.
Today, we get to feast our eyes on Diablo. Oh shoot, that's the wrong game. Today, we get to feast our eyes on Diablo IV, Early Access Beta. Pun intended, as those wondering, yes, I did get access through the KFC promotion. But I read the fine print and ordered a normal chicken sandwich instead of the double down because I like being alive and want to keep it that way, and yet still got the beta code. So yeah, for those of you who ordered the double down, you wanted it. In all sincerity though, even with a cheaper option to access the beta, after my experience with the game, I decided to pre-order despite all my brain cells yelling at me not to. Sadly, this is baseline gamer rhetoric, right? Pre-order bad. And it's true, but the Diablo IV beta felt promising enough that my rational thinking led me to the fact I'm going to play this game day one regardless. This is because Diablo IV feels great. I pre-ordered the game knowing I'd at least enjoy my time leveling my characters to 100 in the full launch, and that's the only definitive thing I can say with the limited content we had access to during the beta. There's nothing we can conclude about the endgame when we are miles away from the finish line. Additionally, we did not get to see the concept or implementation of their shop, battle pass, or any of the other monetization that Blizzard has openly stated will be present in the game. All of these systems will drastically change endgame feel if they Trojan horse power level into a paid system, like gems and glyphs in Diablo Immortal. Blizzard can say there will be no pay to win all they want, but that's only for now. As a live service game, they are always subject to change. But for now, it's time to break down my experience with the beta. So let's dive in. I won't spoil much here, but damn, Diablo IV has some awesome story beats. From the more grounded main campaign and the mystery surrounding Lilith, the daughter of Mephisto, to the demonic and possessed trifles of human reckoning found in side missions, hell literally breaks loose in the world of Sanctuary. Blizzard has crafted some visually stunning cinematics this time around, and with the introduction of side missions after initiating conversations, the camera will lean in, dissolving the game UI to focus on what's being said and promote the action and words from the characters you interact with. There are NPCs in the game you will repeatedly deal with, and these moments of focus make them more memorable and draw you in. I played multiple characters during my testing, and eventually started skipping cinematics in my subsequent playthroughs, generally in the sake of time, but I do appreciate this ability as hacking and slashing is the main point of Diablo. The story is there for those looking for that added level of entertainment, but it is not forced upon you if you're looking to grind. Combat is the meat and potatoes for the Diablo franchise. Blizzard must get this right. And insofar as level 25 out of the full game's 100 character levels, the combat does feel good. Fresh? Maybe not. There are a lot of borrowed ideas and skills from past games, but this is welcome, as many of us have grown an affinity for how a class plays over multiple iterations of the Diablo franchise. There is a lot of old, and there's a lot of new, such as the barbarian turning into motherfucking Kratos. Blizzard has taken a lot of inspiration from past games, aesthetically and mechanically, often taking the middle road between Diablo 2 and 3. Combat is paced somewhere between the boots on the ground feel of Diablo 2 and the I'm addicted to amphetamines feel of Diablo 3. Mobs are more sparse than prior titles in early game, where elite enemies take more focus and challenge you to use your full arsenal of skills and movement capabilities. There isn't much to be said on combat prior to level 15, as this is a stepping off point for how you want your character to play. This will most likely change by the time you acquire your first legendary piece of gear, as only then can you access legendary abilities that really determine how your build performs. These abilities are quite good, And after reaching level 25, I was primarily focused on running dungeons to acquire more legendary aspects to see what options I would have later down the road in full release. There is a list of basic aspects in the collection book, but using basic aspects instead of stealing a unique aspect from dropped gear ensures that you will have the lowest stat on that aspect. So fighting legendary mobs for a chance at high stat roll for said aspect is the best way to optimize. Even basic aspects, however, change your survivability immensely. Playing as Barbarian, hacking enemies at close range, I was dying to bosses quite regularly. As I was building a crit rate character, it became much more viable after finding an aspect that gave me life regen for each enemy in close proximity. Pair that with a barrier every time I hit an elite, and now playing solo doesn't feel so unforgiving. Speaking of, my entire time with the beta was spent solo, outside of the few instances where players would help with an event in the open world. While I generally prefer solo games, there are a few exceptions to that rule.
Rock and stone!
Although I can't speak on what it feels like to play in a group, playing Diablo IV solo is a blast. Despite the glaring balance issues between a mage and a barbarian, I pushed through several deaths as a barbarian and reached a point at level 20 or so where I felt I had mastered my build to an extent. What I mean by balance issues is that my mage at level 15 to 25 felt way more tanky than my barbarian at level 15 to 25, and that may be due to limited gear in the beta, but ultimately each class should have very specific capabilities if PvP should be an expected game mode for players to partake in. If my barbarian's health and damage can't keep up with a mage that is incredibly more versatile while simultaneously having just as much defensive capabilities, I'm not sure PvP will be more than picking the meta. This speculation is only a result of my PvE experience, but even then there were some concerns about what class I'd be playing, not based on fun, but based on overall power. Again, the beta did not offer PvP, which may insinuate it's not quite done yet. But regardless, Blizzard has some work to do in the coming months before release. Respeccing your character is fairly easy and cheap, costing anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000 for a refund of all your skill points, which equates to 2 to 4 pieces of rare gear at level 25, as most items sell for 1,000 or more at that level. I changed my build frequently until I found a build that I liked. Again, this usually occurred after finding a legendary aspect. But Blizzard, please, it's not too late to stop this madness. Make it free. Or, at a bare minimum, keep it this toned down. I was making trade-offs frequently, not in a good way. Do I level a piece of gear I already like, or change my build and wait to scale my power later? In a perfect world, I'd spend my gold on leveling both pieces of gear, and put one in my storage until I want to use it. This would have saved me some agony playing as Barbarian early on, as I had built very different from the skills being enhanced by my first pieces of legendary gear. I'd change my build to something I liked less to utilize the legendary aspect, only to get a piece of gear that enhanced my previous build the following day, where I have to reintroduce myself to the nuances of each skill path. Respeccing a character for free ensures the player is always playing the way they want to play the game. Personally, I won't have the motivation to make a second or third barbarian to achieve the right build from the start, when this game is all about RNG. Ultimately, certain skill paths enhance a specific stat, like crit rate, or what happens when you crit, or what ability procs when you crit, etc. And with certain legendary abilities only affecting one skill, you may never use that gear piece because its effects damage to stunned enemies, and you don't have anything that stuns. Or if you change your build, your substats may not help to make that legendary aspect more effective. It's a lot of work and time to respec, and that's fine, but players shouldn't be punished twice, with a less optimized build and a down payment to do so. Some of you may be screaming at me that my barbarian wasn't as strong as my mage because the barbarian's expertise quest was inaccessible during the beta, because it takes place later on in the storyline. And you're correct. It definitely would have quelled my concerns if each class in the beta was on equal footing, but they weren't. And this is because of the open world. In this iteration of the Diablo franchise, we are definitely getting the MMO treatment. Players will populate cities and open regions of your world. Events and world bosses will pop up and steer players towards them. All in all, this part of the game doesn't feel too bad, but that's the case when all of us are relatively similar level. We'll cast speculation to the side on this one because I'm not sure if other players in your world will be placed there based on player level. In the current version of the game, exploration does feel great though. Playing solo, I was always relieved when another player showed up to cash in on a random event I had started working on. Unlocking a shaded section of the map and finding a new waypoint or dungeon or cellar feels satisfying. Each little camp has a blacksmith and merchant for you to handle all your loot needs. It's only when you make the big decisions, like crafting gems or destroying legendary gear for a new aspect, do you need to teleport to the main city to do so. Using teleport, which is now totally free and does not cost a scroll, is very quick, especially if teleporting to a camp within the same region you're in. Teleporting back to the main city will be considerably longer if you're across the map, but even so, I was teleporting around like Rick Sanchez before he had a felony. Story quests have been broken into key story arcs, allowing the player to progress which way they see fit. Players can start trudging along to unseen vistas the moment they complete the tutorial, and that's a welcome change. Diablo IV being less guided will certainly add to the element of discovery during the first playthroughs, which in my opinion has been the best part of Diablo IV thus far. Finding new things like strongholds, cellars, and world bosses are exciting, and give you that orange twinkle in your eye as you prepare for more sweet legendaries. Unfortunately, players could not test out the new mount system in beta, which is the last piece of the puzzle for the open world. But given how sweet the combat transitions look in trailer from horseback to impact, I imagine mounts will start replacing the constant teleporting. Instead, players will probably rather ride to a location to ogle at how cool their mount is and whether or not it matches their gear set. Even though we couldn't see mounts in action, I do believe players will prefer using mounts outside of teleporting during dungeon runs to sell or scrap gear. Alongside combat, gear is king, and during my first impressions, the gear system in Diablo IV is fine. There isn't a complete overhaul of how we get gear, that's all the same. Kill mobs and open chests. However, stats do take on a different role in D4. With legendary aspects being a major focus, those are easily harvested to use as you need, while stats on rare items are going to be the deciding factor for late game builds. Legendary aspects only have so many total slots depending on how many pieces of gear you have to equip, so many players may opt for using 2 one-handed weapons over using 1 two-handed weapon to utilize more legendary aspects, and say fuck it to the increased base damage and rely more on substats. This is great. There definitely feels like a trade-off for utilizing certain weapon types. This is most noticeable as a mage because barbarians and rogues have a lot more versatility with their weapons, swapping between them based on skills they use. Overall, the amount of control you have over gear is awesome. Changing substats, applying new legendary aspects, and all for a fairly reasonable amount of gold, at least early on. Trading is available in D4. Again, I played solo and did not personally trade with anyone. However, gear will be tradable between players up to a certain quality, that level being legendary gear and above. Common items, magic items, rare items, gold, gems, and elixirs will all be tradable. But unique items, legendary items and aspects, enchanted items, currencies other than gold, quest items, and cosmetic items cannot be traded. I had a blast playing the D4 beta, and although I've sunk a lot of hours into the game during early access, I plan to play even more during the open beta. I've just had too much fun and want to see what else the rogue has to offer compared to the other classes I brought to level 25. Overall, combat and gear feel good, reminiscent of what we loved about Blizzard's original ARPG, mixed with some of the new school UI and tweaks to make it more accessible to casual players. Ultimately, we can only wait until release and months after to see how Blizzard will decide to monetize this game. While my first impressions of Diablo IV are great, my overall impression of Blizzard is complete contempt towards how they run their business. The likes of predatory microtransactions, to explicit misogyny and sexual harassment from the executive board and the following attempts to cover it up. Despite making a good game, these executives are not good people, and cracks will start to appear when we have a full hands-on look at the game on release. With that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.